Judi, welcome to As It Happens.
Thank you.
You are treading on controversial, even dangerous terrain with this book, and in many ways attempting to rewrite history. I just want to ask you, first of all, what concerns do you have for your own security?
Well, I take all these issues seriously every day. I watch what I do. I often change my routine. My sense was always that the campaign that Kagame and his government waged against me as I was doing the research was intended to stop me from publishing, stop me from bringing out this degree of evidence, to silence me. And now that it's there, it's in a book form and people will understand it and talk about it and debate about it, there's really very little he can do now. That's really my belief.
Of course, with Paul Kagame, talking about the president of Rwanda, you believe that he has personally tried to shut this book down?
Yes, I do. Very little is done in Rwanda without his approval. And he works with a quite extensive network of intelligence agents in Rwanda, in neighboring countries in Africa and abroad. And they're very effective. They've infiltrated a lot of organizations. They have managed to operate in clandestine ways everywhere and threaten a lot of people. And they're particularly active in Belgium, in Europe, but they're also active here.
In Canada?
Yes, they are.
And have you? I know that you talk about some people. Your sources were threatened. They would know you were going to see somebody. They would not want to talk to you, or they would even, in some cases, disappear. What are you doing to protect your sources at this point? Because you name some of them. They've given you their names. They have allowed you to publish who they are.
Well, the people I've named, the people who have agreed to be cited in my book, are safely living in Europe. And I say safely, they're taking all the necessary means to remain away from Rwandan circles where they could be penetrated and reached. And so they have asylum, they have refugee status, and they're living their lives quietly with their families. Others I can't name because they are in Africa or they're in countries where they could be located.
I want to start talking to you about what you are saying in this, because you are obviously, we've just in the introduction said you question the official version of events. Any encyclopedic version of the genocide in Rwanda is the same. It is that the president of Rwanda's plane was shot down by Hutu power militias in an effort to trigger what happened, which was the opening salvo of a genocide in which the Hutus set out to kill all the Tutsis, and that Paul Kagame, Colonel Kagame, who headed the forces for the Tutsis, eventually was able to reach the capital and end the war after the genocide after 100 days. You question that narrative. What specifically do you question?
I question that he stopped the genocide. He did not stop the genocide because at the same time that ethnic Tutsis were being killed in Hutu-controlled zones, his Tutsi troops were killing with equal zeal and organization. And in every zone that the Rwandan Patriotic Front and its army entered, they killed massively and in an organized way.
Killed Hutus.
They also fueled the genocide against the Tutsi. So
in what way?
How did they do that? They infiltrated the Hutu militias very successfully. And they baited the violence, they egged on the violence, but they also, some of their commandos, participated in the slaughter of Tutsis at roadblocks. This is a known phenomenon. This is recorded in testimony, in documents from testimony of RPF defectors. I have collected testimony from my own sources who have said this was widespread. So they fueled that genocide against the Tutsis, and they committed a genocide against Hutus as well. So my book reveals or says that the violence during the genocide was bidirectional.
And the record is that the Hutu power militias, the Interahamwe as it was called, massacred Tutsis in the numbers of somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million. What numbers are you saying that the Tutsis killed of Hutus?
Several 100,000, anyhow. I've spoken to a lot of people, and many of them have said that there are at least 500,000 Hutus who were killed by Kagame's troops during the genocide and in the months after the genocide. Now, some people have said that figure could be as high as 1 million. It's very difficult to know in Kagame's Rwanda without doing studies and investigations of the numbers. But clearly, it's a massive number of people who were targeted.
But you're saying you believe you have evidence that shows an equivalency, that equal genocides were committed on both sides, even though one genocide is only documented. Only the genocide against the Tutsis has been documented, and it has been done with books, reports, just thousands of documents. An entire the War Crimes Tribunal looked at evidence of that 100 days and the months past. That genocide is completely documented. You're saying there's an equivalent genocide that occurred that is absolutely not documented anyway, because your version does not appear in any of their books.
No, it doesn't. And this is a real problem, that the killing was not investigated. The killing in RPF-controlled zones was not investigated. And I point out that Human Rights Watch was on the ground after the genocide and didn't fully investigate the areas that Kagame controlled. So number one, there's a problem with the human rights organizations that were there. Number two, the journalists who were there during the genocide had a very hard time figuring out what was going on at first. And when they did go into RPF zones, they were under RPF escort. Just
RPF meaning the Rwandan Patriotic Front, which was the force of and the army of Paul Kagame.
Yes, exactly. And number three, we had an incredible campaign of propaganda going on that started with an NGO called African Rights, and they basically primed world opinion and journalistic opinion on what happened during the genocide. And this was an organization that we have learned was a front organization for the RPF, for Kagame's political party. And they've even, this is an organization that received funding from the government, from Kagame's government afterwards. And so we're able to look at how they did research, then how that research from African Rights was absorbed and regurgitated by even Human Rights Watch, by journalists worldwide. And so we've never really had a look at these things. The other aspect of my book that I want to make sure that people understand is that the campaign of violence that started even before the genocide, but certainly in the genocide and after the genocide in earnest, has been waged to some extent against dissidents in order to cover up Kagame's record. So he's continuing to kill in order to shut down any witness testimony coming forward, anybody talking about his legacy, anyone talking about the scorched earth campaign that he waged before the genocide and what his troops actually did behind the front during the genocide. So this is a difficult matter to address today because people are afraid to talk about it.
One of the major accounts of what happened in the Rwandan genocide comes from General Romeo Dallaire, who wrote a book, Shake Hands with the Devil. And His account is the official one. He was there. He was there, and he was the one who flagged in advance that he believed that the genocide was being planned, or something big was being planned. He watched what was going on. He could see what Paul Kagame was doing, and he could see what Hutu power was doing. He had as neither you nor I, and many of the people who you just mentioned who wrote these later reports, he was there, an eyewitness. And he says this is what happened, not what you say. Do you think he's part of the propaganda?
I wouldn't say he's part of the propaganda, but I think he's part of the problem. In that, I mean, let me just say, first of all, Romeo Dallaire is not responsible for Rwandans tearing each other apart. He's not responsible for what Kagame did. But I do question his judgment, and I do for a number of reasons. He, in his book, talks about the killing fields that Kagame's troops captured as it moved from the north down the eastern edge of the country to the south. And in fact, they weren't capturing killing fields. What they were doing was killing peasants, luring them to meetings, shooting them, burning them, taking them to parks. And there is no mention of this in Romeo Dallaire's book. And there should have been, and I'll tell you why. Was that a deliberate
omission? Do you think that he deliberately omitted that?
I have no idea. I would like to ask him that question, and I think he should speak about this, because he continues to show up at conferences and talks about the genocide, but he doesn't want to talk about anything that pertains to the RPF and its activities. And one of the interesting things that happened in May, because this is fairly early on, and he was certainly in Kigali, as you mentioned. He was there in Rwanda during the genocide. He saw a lot of things. As force commander of UNAMIR, the United Nations peacekeeping force that was in Rwanda, I think he would have gotten access to UN refugee reports, a major cable that Refugees International, another refugee organization, picked up. These reports were coming out of the east of the country, which were detailing wide-scale slaughter by Kagame's troops, by the RPF and RPA, along the eastern edge, as against Hutu refugees, against Hutu civilians that were fleeing into Tanzania. Now, that is documented. There's a report that came out in May, a cable. It was very important.
May 1994.
May 1994. It seems to me very strange. It's odd, to say the least, that the force commander of the UN peacekeeping force would not be aware of this or would not mention it in his book. He also talks about the fires, the smoke coming from Akagera Park because of dryness during the genocide. And yet it rained. There was record rainfall in April.
He was lying? Do you think
I don't know. I'm not accusing him of lying. What I'm
saying,
did you
interview him?
I tried to. He doesn't want to be interviewed by me. But I think these are questions that he can answer. I think he is dismissing the crimes and willfully. I think he's not acknowledging Kagame's record. And there's enough evidence for someone like Romeo Dallaire to understand and realize that this is a war criminal.
This is As It Happens, and I have with me in the studio Judi Rever. We're talking about her book, In Praise of Blood, The Crimes of the Rwandan Patriotic Front. And Judi, one of the issues that you raise, and you're not the first to do this, is to say that the genocide, which we know seems to have begun on the night of April 6th, when the plane carrying the president was shot down, and always maintained to be the Hutu power militias that did that as a prelude to the genocide. You say that's not the case. You believe that Paul Kagame's forces shot down the plane. Why would he do that?
Why would he do that? Paul Kagame could not live with the peace. There would be no way that he could hold on to power. There would be no way he could win an election and have that support. And because of the crimes he had also committed, his troops had committed during the invasion war 3 years before the genocide, that area, under a peacekeeping agreement, if he shared power, that area would have been opened up. And some of those crimes that he committed even before the Interahamwe and the Hutu militia committed crimes, that would have been discovered. And he wanted power. I think he was part of a group of Tutsis, Rwandan Tutsis, who grew up in Uganda and were raised there, were marginalized, and they wanted their place back. And they also wanted to secure land, homes, property, a place for all of the Tutsis who had been chased out in pogroms in the late 50s and early 60s. So there's that aspect to it.
Okay, but what we're talking about, what was launched after that plane came down, was a genocide against Tutsis. You haven't denied that that also happened. So
No.
Why would Paul Kagame initiate something that he knew would mean the mass slaughter of his own people?
I think he wanted to seize power and hold on to it for a very long time. And the way in which he did that was to create a situation where he was the moral victor, and there were enough Tutsis who had died so that he would appear to have saved the country. So using the deaths and the massacres of Tutsis as fodder for a stock in trade, for securing his legitimacy and also domination going forward.
Another Canadian, Louise Arbour, became the chief prosecutor for war crimes and crimes against humanity for Rwanda. You say in the book, and I've heard this elsewhere, she had heard about this. Her investigators had raised the possibility that Paul Kagame had committed these crimes and that he was not under investigation. Why do you think the International Tribunal for Rwanda did not investigate the crimes of Paul Kagame?
Well, I think they wanted to protect him, and these are questions that should be put to them. I mean, wider geopolitical questions. But one of the things is I think they needed to prosecute and at the same time provide stability in the region. And their misguided notion at the time was Kagame is our man. And they would not have made any progress in prosecuting Hutus if they didn't have the cooperation of Kagame.
I know you didn't talk to Louise Arbour. You say that in the book. I did speak with her about this, and I asked her this some years ago, and she had told me at that time that she was beholden to Paul Kagame, in order to get access to the crime scene, which was Rwanda, that he was the president, and that it was very difficult to get the evidence that she wanted to seek a conviction or to actually seek an indictment against him, but she couldn't gather that evidence without jeopardizing her people. She had people on the ground. She worried about their safety. That she was perfectly aware, and I'd never heard an indication that she was collaborating in some way or trying to protect Kagame. What would you say to that?
Well, I think part of that response that you've just given from her is valid, and she did need to get access to the crime scene. But the crime scene involved crimes committed by the former regime, elements that supported the former regime and Hutu militia, but also Kagame's crime scene. So right off, she's making a judgment call and saying, you know, one side committed worse crimes and we'll have to get access to that. That's our principal objective. And the rest we'll have to overlook. So that judgment is not legally sound. What also is...
Or maybe it was a deal with the devil. Maybe it was the only way to get any convictions at all if she was going to be able to at least do one genocide, if not the other.
Well, I think that's part of it. I think so it became about politics. But it's it's very important to understand as well how some of those excuses or explanations don't stand the test of time because they're not legally sound. She has since said that she didn't have the mandate to, for example, to prosecute or investigate properly the downing of the plane, which triggered the genocide. She shut down the first attempt at investigating that. She was initially, according to my sources and according to some public documents, interested in pursuing that. And then she came back, she flipped and said, no, I can't. I don't have jurisdiction. And she has maintained that argument, which is not legally sound because the part of the mandate, Chapter 4, Article 4 of the mandate of the Rwanda Tribunal was to investigate terrorism. And we've seen the UN back several inquiries on other leaders who have been, like Rafik Hariri, Benazir Bhutto. We've had international inquiries into the assassination of these people, yet there has been no international inquiry into this. She certainly had the mandate. It was in the mandate of the ICTR, so that argument doesn't stand up.
I'm in studio with journalist Judi Rever, and we're talking about her book, In Praise of Blood, which questions the official version of the genocide in Rwanda. You know there are others who have attempted to examine this story and to question the narrative, and they are often accused of revisionism. They're accused of being genocide deniers. Are you one of them?
I'm not a genocide denier. I do recognize and believe, because there's compelling evidence that shows that Tutsis were killed in massive numbers. There was a genocide against Tutsis. And I've met and interviewed enough Tutsis to know that that was true. Am I revisionist? I guess I am, because the official narrative of the genocide stipulates that there's basically one group of people who were targeted. That's the Tutsis. And in fact, that's not true. So we have, there is a whole portion of history that's been concealed, that's been buried, and that needs to be revised. And I actually think that revising historical narratives is necessary because revisionism is the lifeblood of historical scholarship.
Paul Kagame, you write, someone else has said, Rwanda no longer is a country, it's a powerful system of control. There are other accounts now slowly coming out about the kind of Rwanda that Paul Kagame presides over. Who do you blame for the power he has? Who do you blame for the account you give in the story? At whose feet do you lay this at?
It's everyone's fault, I think. I mean, if we
Canada, the United States, the international community?
I think the international community led by the United States has steered so many of these events and have given Kagame the means to become who he is today. There's certainly no more authoritarianism today than there was 20, 25 years ago. But what he has now is a greater means to use it. And if we look at the loss of life, it's devastating for millions of people. And so who do I blame for the last 2.5 decades? I think the West shares as much or more of the blame. I certainly wouldn't blame the victims, and their needs and their loss has never been examined.
This investigation of yours in your book has, I know, taken a great personal toll. I know that because you write about it in the book. Your marriage ended. You had fears for your children. Your husband warned you that if you kept doing this, if you kept going out and trying to get to the bottom of this, that you were actually putting the lives of your children at risk. How much have you sacrificed to write this book?
I've sacrificed enormously. for a while, a good part of my life was wrapped up in this, and I couldn't see fully what was going on. I couldn't assess it. But I have to say, eventually I was able to kind of break through to my family, and I got a lot of support from them, and we took every possible precaution necessary to help me finish this book. So did I make the right choices? I don't know. But I needed to investigate this story. It was something I started 20 years ago. It was something I needed to finish. And I think there were many points where I felt that I needed to stop, and probably I should have stopped. But in the end, I realized that I needed to do the work in a different way, in a more organized and clever way, smartly, and just finish it and get it out, because there was safety and reassurance once it was all done, and I could sit back and just think, well, now I have, some assurance that they can't prevent me from doing something, and there's some, level of safety in being in Canada. So what I did was I stopped traveling and just quietly finished writing, and here it is. That's not very good. I don't think I expressed myself well there, but
I think that thinking that you're going to sit back and relax and rest now, and that this is done, I think you're completely wrong. You're going to find yourself
I know.
on the hot seat quite a bit with this book, and I really appreciate all the effort you went into doing this and the years you put into it. And thank you for coming into the studio, Judi.
Thank you for having me.